You'll probably want to freshen up first anyway.
You look ridiculous.
You'll probably want to change your clothes when you're ready.
What makes you say that, Iris? Why do you think I would want to freshen up?
Final Fantasy holds the throne as the greatest in the JRPG genre, and some of gaming as a whole. Its tales don't need to be sung, as to this day they are still the cornerstone and benchmark of excellence strived for. But in the 2000s and the shift to more modern, powerful hardware like the PS3, Square struggled to meet these expectations set by themselves.
Thus, maybe no game of the franchise had more to prove than Final Fantasy XV. What legacy would Final Fantasy XV leave behind? Would it reclaim the throne? Final Fantasy XV was a game that was plagued with troubles from its genesis.
Since it was announced, it would endure a 10-year journey before it would be released to the world. Over a decade of development that saw an ocean of troubles, and with the passage of time, loftier expectations and promises to meet. But after all of that, it finally saw a release November 29th, 2016.
But despite terrific reviews, it since found itself in a weird place, with its dirty laundry aired so publicly and a lot of skeletons out of the closet. In a wait so long, most of its audience had grown thinking it would never see the light of day. It's become somewhat of an easy target for criticism, being divisive about where it stands and if it was worth the wait at all. So before getting into this game, I think we need to talk about how this game came to be and why people have such a hard time summarizing their feelings on it.
This game was revealed to the world in 2006 as Tetsuya Nomura, director of the Kingdom Hearts series and designer of some of the most iconic characters in the Final Fantasy franchise, came up with the idea that would be the opposite of Kingdom Hearts. His love for extremes being the driving force, brooding and moody darkness in contrast to Kingdom Hearts' shining light of optimism.
With the dark, more mature tones and a big emphasis on death as a narrative tool, it was decided it would be a branch off Final Fantasy's main entries and Final Fantasy XIII Versus. But the game would be kept hidden from the public, and with more CG trailers and even a tech demo being shown off over the years, building the lore, characters, and world of the game up in the public consciousness. It wasn't until 2011, 5 years after its announcement, when it was announced that the game was about only 20% complete.
In 2012, the game wasn't moving at all, and Square Enix thought about canceling the project altogether. Hajime Tabata and his team stepped on to save and co-direct after staff were exhausted and fretful for the project's collapse. Over 90% of the team wanted to quit and abandon the project altogether, and Tabata convinced them all to keep fighting for it. In this time, it would still experience an aimless direction, as over 6 years of development hell, Nomura was still throwing new ideas and dramatic new concepts, suggesting that the game be turned into a musical after he had seen a showing of 2012's Les Miserables. The higher-ups at Square Enix turned him down. 6 years of development that we know. That would be like your wife coming home and you being like, oh, by the way, I realized I didn't want a kid, I wanted a rabbit, so I swapped it out at the pet store. This isn't a joke. Unfortunately, I can't write jokes this funny. Just 6 years into development, he wanted a musical all of a sudden. The thing you have to understand about Nomura is he's not like the rest of us. He is the kind of guy that will say, hey, while you're developing this game, why not make the core mechanic a slot machine? Because I like pachinko games. Or why not make Sephiroth the greatest villain of all time, maybe? Make his best friend a J-pop star that he was having a crush on at the time. That's a thing that happened. So when you think of Final Fantasy as a musical, because he saw one night on a whim, that makes sense.
Square Enix couldn't wait any longer, and Nomura was taken off and moved to work on Kingdom Hearts 3, where Tabata would stay behind and be the new sole director. We will talk about Nomura and his insane links to Kingdom Hearts and Noctis a little bit later. It was then decided that Final Fantasy Versus 13 would be rebranded as Final Fantasy 15 and move from the PS3 to the upcoming PS4. The game had a new captain steering it to shores. Under immense pressure from the company and the world, Tabata and his team took what elements that they could from Versus 13, characters, themes, designs, and music, and more, and started crafting something from scratch. They had a strict budget and an intense timeline to follow. What we got wasn't Versus 13, but something new. Under this new direction, and only a few years to put together the impossible, Final Fantasy 15 was finally released, 10 years later. So now, 5 whole years after its initial release, why are we still talking about this game? And what do we think makes it so special that it's worthy of a second look? From its rich, somber, and often bittersweet narrative to its innate human dialogue, and with a beautifully realized world so rich with lore that it spanned a movie, an anime tie-in, DLC, canceled DLC, books about the canceled DLC, demos, remakes, demakes with weird little Playmobil looking motherfuckers. But before anything, let's get into the story.
Yeesh, okay, I'm gonna summarize this up as quick as I can. The lead of our story is Noctis Lucis Calum, the crown prince of the Kingdom of Lucis. In the world of Eos, the Kingdom of Lucis is at war with the Niflheim Empire in the northeast, who are muscling their way through the kingdom, pushing their forces to Noctis' home, the crown city of Insomnium. In an effort to form a peace treaty, it is agreed that the Prince Noctis will marry Lunafreya, a childhood friend of his who was forced into a position of great importance as the Oracle. Now, the Oracle is charged with maintaining the stability of the world, communing with the gods, and using her powers to halt the Star Scourge, which is a plague on the world that lengthens nights and gives powers to demons. Powers to demons. It is spelt like Damons.
Matt Damons.
Matt Damons. It becomes clear that the Empire has no means of honoring this peace treaty, though, and the standing king of Lucis, Noctis' father, Regis, sets his son on an adventure with the 3 loyal royal retainers to meet Lady Lunafreya. So
3 loyal royal boils.
The 3 loyal royal boils to meet Lady Lunafreya so the wedding may continue.
These 3 boys in charge of looking after Noctis happen to be his greatest friends. Ignis, the calm-mannered, well-composed mom of the group.
Hi, my name's Adam Crowsdale, and I play Ignis in Final Fantasy 15. Ignis is the confidant to the king-in-waiting, Noct, and he is very cerebral, quite funny without meaning to be, and an organizer, extremely organized and extremely capable.
Gladiolus, the blunt and headstrong bodyguard to Noctis, who takes great pride in being Noctis' shield.
My name's Chris Parson, and in Final Fantasy 15, I play Gladio. Gladio is a guy who he has a soft spot, but at the same time, he's a ferocious guy that you do not want to cross.
And lastly, Prompto, the loudmouth, idiot best friend with a heart of gold.
My name's Robbie Damon, and I play Prompto in Final Fantasy 15. Well, when I first read for Prompto, immediately I recognized his archetype from Final Fantasy series, but I didn't want to play him as just straight comedy relief. So even though that's sort of his function within the 4, we wanted to be really careful to make sure that he was grounded and human and still believable.
The main character of the game is named Noctis Lucis Calum, who is the king-to-be. He's pretty quiet, reserved.
He's gay, but he has a special connection to classical music. There's many things that are interesting about him.
Thus, the 4 of them set off on the most high-budget road trip / bachelor party ever known. But if you need clarification beyond that, just think of these guys.
I ask not that you guide my wayward son, merely that you remain at his side.
Indeed, Your Grace.
We'll see the prince to Alticia if it's the last thing we see.
Yeah, what he said.
Hate to break this up, but Kor's got the motor running. Drados, he's in your hands.
And another thing. Do mind your manners around your charming bride-to-be.
Your Majesty as well. Try to mind yours around our esteemed guests from Niflheim.
You have no cause for concern.
Nor do you.
Take heed. Once you set forth, you cannot turn back.
You think I would?
I need only know that you are ready to leave home behind.
Don't know about you, but I'm ready as I'll ever be.
Take care on the long road. Wheresoever you should go, the line of Lucis goes with you. Walk tall, my son.
And this is where everything in the game really comes together, because at the core of this game, it's about these 4 boys and their relationship, and everything is in service to that.
This game has you travel all over the world together, fighting monsters, exploring, driving around, helping people, camping and cooking in your Coleman branded camping gear, and living moment to moment. And in every single aspect of that, these boys' personalities are on full display at all moments. You're creating memories with them, really.
This game makes sure that at any given point during the game, you feel like you're just traveling the world with your best friends. It gives you this through a very deliberate and intimate lens that is very easy to project your own experiences and memories on. Tabata is a master at taking massive operatic high fantasy worlds and situations and grounding them back in very real human moments. Something that is so unbelievably special about 15 is that you're always experiencing different dialogue and voice lines from these characters constantly. There is so much these characters have to say in contrast to other games that feel like you're hearing the same thing over and over.
It's clear from the beginning, the most important part of the game was making sure these characters work, and that you feel that these are real people who travel together.
But that doesn't mean that they never shut up. 15 will let its moments linger and breathe. Sometimes those moments are long drives of silence that feel deliberate in place of dialogue. You can feel aggression or tension brewing, or a moment of quiet comfort over the entire group as nothing is said. This is what happens when you have these characters in the shop for over 10 years. We know them. And sometimes you don't have to say anything to prove that. The silence speaks volumes more than a conversation could.
Now, all this isn't lost when the game switches into its action set pieces, combat, and gameplay. This was Final Fantasy's big step into the action JRPG genre. Like previously said before, it was supposed to be the dark, edgy big brother to Kingdom Hearts in its first Genesis. And some people embraced it, and others were very against it at the time.
Now in hindsight, and Final Fantasy VII Remake building on it more, and the to-be-released Final Fantasy XVI coming soon with the combat behind it being done by the king who did Devil May Cry 5, it seems like a natural, normal progression.
You play as Noctis, or now all 4 boys thanks to updates, who can summon kingly weapons out of thin air, changing between anything from swords, staffs, axes, crossbows, and more. But what's more fun is just throwing your sword into an enemy, plunging it inside of their guts, and teleporting right to them to continue a combo. It has its hiccups, but when you get into the groove, it feels really good.
Where the game really carves out itself from almost every other action game, though, lies with its emphasis on its characters again. It never stops putting them center stage.
You are constantly teaming up for attacks with them, throwing one-liners and banter back and forth like it's an action movie, making sure you have the time to do the necessary high fives and cool poses. You see different sides of these characters through the combat as well. For instance, the usually reserved and quiet Gladio shows off that he's a general, barking orders and aggressively storming off into battle, leading the way. It's great seeing how the game never stops telling you about the characters through its gameplay. It's not like many other games that divide their story and character work up between cutscenes and gameplay being something totally separate. Other open world games can be a pretty lonely experience. It's you, alone, versus the world. So this is where Final Fantasy 15 really sets itself apart, because it really feels like you are on a road trip with the boys, having the time of your life, drinking cold suds, catching fish,
catching ladies,
catching vibes.
Here, the true rhythm of it comes from being in sync with your friends. The more you're able to understand them, anticipate them, work with them, the more you're rewarded with these high damaging team-up attacks and moments. Even the skill tree progression system is tied to improving your teammates and giving you more options to work together. But it's not just interested in the positive aspects of being essentially codependent, though. In one of its most poignant moments, Ignis is severely injured and the tensions between Gladio and Noctis are running high as a result.
The gameplay stops to a complete crawl, and a mission you would have done without a second thought becomes extremely tedious to the point of frustration. But this is perfect, because that's exactly how the characters would perceive it at the time, and serves to drive home how important it is for you and your boys to work together as a functioning team. And just like a real-life personal conflict, once you confront those feelings and resolve them, you feel stronger than before from gaining some perspective on what you might have taken for granted. So when it's resolved and you're back into combat, it feels like a triumph.
Which is terrific, because you'll be in combat a lot. Not just because it's fun and rewarding, but because there's so much variety in what you can fight. A series like this is known for its monsters. You'll see the classics like the Cactars and the Behemoths, and every single one is made to really sell you on the world.
But you can also fight these big legendary creatures, to even the gods themselves. You feel the scale and power of them in every moment. You're proving yourself to the gods, and it feels like that. And when you win their favor and you're able to summon them, fuck, you'll never feel power quite the same in a game. The screen darkens and the music bellows, and you bring in a god to nuke the world with a big sword or a blast, completely devastating all life in the vicinity with the judgment you just cast.
See, after people complained about Final Fantasy 13 feeling about a long hallway and their next game, technically, like we'll talk about Final Fantasy 14 in another video, made sure that you were overwhelmed with options and that it fit into serving the game itself. Each character has something that they love that shines a new feature on the game. Noctis loves fishing, so you can level that skill up by fishing. Gladio likes hiking and exploring, so in turn, you're rewarded more for doing more. Ignis, being the mom of the group and looking after the dumb boys, will cook for them, showing you different buffs and boosts you can get from that. But my favorite part? The photo mode in this game. Yes, you can take photos how you like, but the real value comes from Prompto himself constantly chronicling your adventures with the boys. If it's stopping for photos at beautiful vistas, cool action shots while you take down monsters, candid moments, exploring the world and cityscapes, to taking selfies at the most unopportune times. You get to see these at the end of your day as you head back to camp,
where you'll be able to reflect and talk with each other, get unique dialogue, cutscenes, moments, and more, but also rewarding you with all the XP that you've accumulated out in the world. Because the game never for a moment forgets the story it's trying to tell, but it doesn't beat you over the head with it. These characters that seem like stock character tropes at first get broken down in so many ways. Instead of piling things on over and over, complicating things, it spends time enriching what's already there.
What this game offers that more games need to understand is that there's more there if you want it. The more you put into the game, the more you'll get in return. For instance, a big set piece early on takes place that the director said would have completely ruined the pacing of the game and distracted from the narrative. So instead of spending over a year reformatting the game just to include that, they worked around it. And when the kingdom is attacked when Noctis is gone, the moment is now about how these characters are reacting to this news and how they carry on from there.
But if you're interested in seeing that, you have an entire tie-in movie, Kingsglaive, you can watch that will fill in more of the politics of the war, and it has big names like Sean Bean and Aaron Paul and Lena is it Headley? It's Cersei from Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
that one.
You never watched
two people from Game of Thrones.
There's a lot of Game of Thrones. There's a 6-episode anime series that spends its time showcasing more depth to the boys, appropriately titled Brotherhood. It's not about trying to explain away every single thing that didn't need an answer, like Han Solo.
Chewbacca? Alright, well, you're gonna need a nickname, because I ain't saying that every time.
It adds new layers where you can look at scenes differently, like how in one of my favorite moments in the game, you travel with Gladio's little sister. She clearly has a crush on Noct. You see how the group changes with a new member in it. You get to spend the entire time enjoying these beautiful locations and an expertly written banter, fighting together. It's all so rich on its own, and narratively in the story, it serves as one of the last hurrah and send-off of the happy moments before putting all these characters through hell.
Which, if you want, you can experience the lows they all go through in the DLC episodes, showing how these characters are like on their own and at their lowest. It gives you them in a new lens and light that makes you understand deeper. They're all worth playing, and they only get progressively better. It even has you teaming up with some of the supporting cast in the game, like how Gladio seeks training from the group's mentor and guide, Core, played by the man who needs no introduction, Matthew Mercer.
My favorite has to be Arnea, though. She's this awesome mercenary for hire who first appears as an enemy, but quickly you see she's more complicated, and she ends up teaming up with you a lot. And it's such a cool reinvention of the Dragoon trope in Final Fantasy.
But the highlight of it all has to be the Arden episode. Something people unanimously agree about the game is how great of a villain Arden is. You know from the beginning he's untrustworthy, or that there's something off. This isn't lost on the crew, but seeing it play out is a real strength to the writing and how it unfolds the story.
Which we should really get back to. The game really gives you as much free time as you want to leisurely spend with your boys on your way to see your beloved-to-be, Lady Lunafreya. So while making your way onto Altissia, you have also been spending your time winning the favor of the gods and finding the tombs of your ancestors, adding royal weapons to your arsenal. And when you get there, it unsurprisingly all goes to hell. All the moving parts catch up, and the plan to not only win the favor of the goddess Leviathan goes sour, but so does your reunion with Lady Lunafreya, nulling the treaty of the warring nations.
Despite everyone's best efforts, Arden shows his true hand and stabs Luna, the Oracle, the last person keeping the curse of the darkness away. Using the last of her power, Lunafreya calls upon the kings of the past to lend Noctis their strength, giving him the power to defeat Leviathan in one last moment. Straight out of Sonic Adventure. It's just another amazing set piece that the game throws at you.
Noctis says one final goodbye to Luna on the astral plane, and when he awakes, he learns everything has only gotten worse. In Luna's passing, the nights have gotten longer. Day is slowly fading, and Ignis has been blinded in the attack. In her death, she has given Noctis the Ring of Luci, potentially the last hope they have.
The hell is wrong with you?
What?
We're not stopping in Tenebrae. You need to grow up and get over it.
I am over it. I'm here, aren't I?
Maybe when you're not too busy moping, you can look around and give a shit about someone worse off than you.
Discouraged and broken, the four set off. Morale is at a low, but the boys arrive at one of the royal tombs, conquering it together and squashing the beef between them.
I would remain with you all. To the very end.
Now, the story's kind of moving through a lot of stuff right now, so I'm going to try to give you all the important parts. But you're back on the train until Arden shows up again. He tricks you into attacking Prompto and pushing him off the train, which, you know, it happens. Boys fall off the train. The rest of the boys make it into Niflheim and are closer to the crystal. Oh yeah, you're all looking for a crystal because you believe it has the power to fight off the demons and the darkness. It's Final Fantasy, this is normal stuff. So you continue on and you gain the favor of Shiva, who reveals that Arden is immortal and that none of their attacks will do anything to him. He seems to be drawing his power from the darkness as well.
The boys finally arrive in Graelia, but only after losing one of their own. The Regalia, the Turtle Van, sacrificed in the battle to get our heroes where they needed to go. They party rock up to the gates, people die, cool fights, great spooky atmosphere, and the boys meet back up with Pronto. And Noctis makes his way up to the crystal.
Where bam, it's revealed that the salty sailor Arden has tricked Noctis, and this crystal slowly starts absorbing him. Being taunted by Arden, who reveals his true name as Arden Lucis Calum, an ancestor to Noctis, who was to become the chosen king until the gods rejected him. Unable to die, Arden will always return and thus has been plotting for the demise of the Calum family line, to spit in the face of the gods that abandoned him.
He explains to Noctis that he wouldn't get any satisfaction in killing him as a mortal, and asks him to take the crystal's power and become the true king. And so Noctis gets trapped and sleeps inside the crystal, absorbing all of its power. In this astral plane, Noctis meets the god Bahamut, who would tell him the fate of the true king. The true king has the power of destroying all the darkness in the world, but at the cost of their own life.
All right, so take a moment to breathe. A lot of exposition, but now we're getting into the final act of the game. And to really appreciate it, we need to talk about Arden. Arden revealed to Noctis that not only is he related by blood, but he was once just like him, chosen by the gods for a divine purpose. But unlike Noctis, the gods abandoned him. Arden had the ability to heal and to take the darkness and sickness people had inside them and suffer for them. He spent his time healing, living in peace, and falling in love with the Oracle at the time. But the gods saw that, and because he took the darkness of the Star Scourge inside of him, he was now tainted and impure in their eyes. But he was pure.
Actually, for your information.
Regardless of his pure and selfless intention of healing the world.
They turned their backs on him and cited his brother as the new bloodline to the Chosen. And in this, villainized the man, killing his love. And when it was revealed that Arden couldn't die from taking in this darkness, he was locked away for centuries, wasting away in despair and loneliness, until centuries later, Niflheim found his location, saving him in hopes to use his power. Arden was still uninterested, until he saw, for the first time, just how much the gods laughed in his face by seeing the entire empire that was given to his brother's bloodline. He then decided to spurn revenge on not only his own blood, but the gods themselves, hoping to ruin their plans. All of this is beautifully told and acted and creates such a dramatic and somber final battle because you agree with Arden. You're angry at the gods for how they toy with people and the world. You really learn to sympathize with him.
Now, before we conclude, this will be the spoiler warning to anyone who wants to experience the ending on their own. But to really capture our feelings on the game, I think it's important to talk about this beautiful ending and why it wraps up the game so perfectly. So, 3, 2, 1.
All right. So Noctis wakes up 13 years later, and the world is in an endless night. He receives a message from his very special magic dog, Umbra, who lets him know his friends are waiting for him back where it all started in Hammerhead.
Hey.
Hey? That's all you have to say for yourself after all this time?
Noct! It's you! It's really
Is
you!
it? I hadn't realized.
Well, well. You kept us waiting.
Not like I wanted to. We've got catching up to do.
After meeting up with them, you march back into the ruins of the City of Insomnia, Noctis' home. After fighting your way through gods and monsters with the boys, back in the saddle again, you stroll up to the final battle.
But before that happens, Tabata takes a second to remind you about what this has all been for, and maybe my favorite marriage of gameplay, storytelling, mechanics, and features. Noctis asks Prompto to look through all the photos.
Can I see your photos?
Yeah.
I just need one to take with me.
Oh, yeah. I get it.
You take a look through everything you have as everyone comments on the memories, reflecting back on everything you've done together. It's such a beautiful way to get you as a player to be in the shoes of Noctis and reflect on your journey. What could have been such a simple mechanic meant for, nothing more than that was entangled into the storytelling of the game through great directing.
So once you remembered everything you're fighting for, you take on Arden alone. It's a war between kings. You fly through the city, both calling upon the same power you fought the entire game to collect. And in this fight, Arden, with his dying breath, tells you he will see you on the other side. In the final moments, you're left reflecting on the tragedy of the whole thing as you walk up the steps to reclaim your throne.
Prompto. Gladio. Ignis. I leave it to you. Walk tall, my friends.
As Noctis summons his ancestors, the kings of the past, as they deliver blow after blow, slowly killing the hero. The last one being done by his own father, who can barely watch as his son makes the sacrifice he was marked for, born just to die.
And in this death, he's brought to the astral plane, where he meets Arden once more. This time, using the power of everyone who's traveled with him and the Knights of Round to kill the darkness inside of him one last time. And in the death of the king, a new day finally dawns for the first time in years. And in death, Noctis and Lunafreya are finally reunited, looking down at the photo you selected to bring with you, admiring the moment you had with your friends. This is where the game is at its greatest. This is why I love this game so much, because despite its faults, impossible to meet expectations in the grand fantasy epic, the baggage was left roadside, the drive was smooth, and it delivered something I don't think I've had any other game deliver before.
Well, what can I say? You guys are the best.
It's bookended and intertwined throughout the entire story. Even from the very beginning, your father knows your fate and set you off on a journey with your best friends to experience life, to experience friendship, knowing the limited time that you had left. The game has everything you could want from the epic scale of Final Fantasy, but its primary goal throughout all of it was for you to enjoy the trip and the small detours in life. You're rewarded for the time that you put into it, and it uses the medium to tell these moments that only gameplay can. It knows it's a game, and it knows how to take advantage of those moments.
I think it's easy to look at the history of this game and be disappointed with what we didn't get, when we were promised something that didn't even exist. But with something even more sad, in an unprecedented move, the director Tabata left Square Enix, and the final DLC that was promised, that would have expanded on the story, was never finished and canceled by the company. It would have featured Luna in an entire episode of her own, and it was something fans really wanted after her role had to be reduced. But the real tragedy comes to the light of what would have been the final act, the Noctis DLC, that featured Noctis living out dreamlike scenarios of alternate timelines while he was asleep in the crystal. It was going to play out the first ever trailer in Final Fantasy Versus 13, which would have been like the perfect bookend to this entire story, tying back to its roots and adding closure. But I think what we got is not only unique, but something that deserves to be celebrated. It's an experience that I've never seen any other game try to do, and something I haven't felt in the medium before. I really hope this video helps you look at this game in a new light. Maybe it gets you to try it, and maybe it gets you to appreciate the small things in life when it feels a little dark.
And in the dark and in death can come rebirth. Because, in a way, the story of Final Fantasy 15 might not be over. Not completely. When Nomura was put onto Kingdom Hearts 3, he wasn't able to get this game and Noctis out of his mind.
So much so that Noctis, or a version of him, has found a new life as Sora's direct opposite. Something that was symbolic now taking on a new meaning. Kingdom Hearts features a character named Yuzora, which has the same meaning to Noctis, night sky. And Yuzora is from a world that no longer exists. He resembles Noctis in more than just looks, and it could even be a version of him that survived through Nomura's love for the character. We will have to see just how it plays out in the new Kingdom Hearts.
Thank you so much for watching. My name is Josh. We are Touch Fuzzy. And if you could like, comment, subscribe, maybe send to a friend and say, hey, I like this video. Even if you didn't, don't tell us if you didn't, because we're not interested. We only want to hear pure positive feedback. Constructive criticism, get that out of here. Not on my watch. We're never going to get any better.